Hi, everybody. Welcome to Venturing Abroad, a podcast brought to you by Daphne, where we're going to be speaking with entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders in tech on international scaling, cultural adaptation, and so much more. My name is Erica, and before we get started, I want to thank you for listening to our very first episode of this podcast. I'm thrilled to welcome Kyung, one of our venture partners here at Daphne, as our co-host for this conversation. Hello, Kyung. It's nice to see you. How's it going today?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited about this one. Finally trading tennis records for good conversations with Ervin.
Yes. Well, we'll be getting into a little bit of tennis talk towards the end of our conversation. And just to give some context to our listeners, Kyung and our guest used to work at the same investment firm in Amsterdam. It's one of the biggest ones in the world, and we'll be getting into that in just a moment. In this episode, we're going to be venturing to quite a few different places as our guest has truly worked all over the world. Today, we are very happy to welcome Ervin Tu to the podcast. Ervin is an investor who has led some of the world's biggest companies, including Prosus and Naspers Group and SoftBank. He has led them in global deals that have shaped the world as we know it today, leading investments in companies such as ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, and Uber. With experience working in the United States, South Africa, the Netherlands, and beyond, we are so excited to get to know and learn from Ervin. Ervin, we so appreciate you joining us today. Welcome to Venturing Abroad.
Thanks so much, Erica. Very excited to be a part of this podcast and share a few things, I hope of some modest value with your audience. So very excited to be part of this.
Thank you. Well, I want to start our conversation by taking us to the beginning of your journey. Share with us, who is Ervin, where are you from, and what led to your interest and passion in tech and investment?
Who is Ervin? I think I'm still trying to figure that out, Erica. The journey is long and continuing, just like my journey, Kyung, to continue to improve my tennis game. So I think my passion for investing in technology, started when I began working at Goldman Sachs, first as a young associate in New York in the TMT group, which was in 2004. 2003, I was a summer intern right after the internet bubble had burst. So there was still a lot of excitement, though not as much excitement in the air about what technology could do in light of that recent history. And then I moved to our group, I still say the TMT group in San Francisco, which of course was the epicenter. It still is the epicenter of technology, arguably in the world, although the Chinese would have something to say about that these days. And it was there in San Francisco advising clients across a number of industries, working with them on public offerings, IPOs, as well as M&A transactions, and just providing general finance advice, where I grew quite attracted to the technology industry and the potential for incredible value creation. I then had the opportunity to work with SoftBank and Prosus for 5 years. I helped create the Vision Fund, actually traveled around the world on the traveling team to negotiate the fund docs. So that was an experience, and then had the privilege to lead some of the biggest transactions you alluded to, ByteDance and Uber, of course. So that's been the journey. Most recently, I was at Prosus. I had led the company. I was the CIO, and then became the president and CIO after the board named a permanent CEO, choosing a founder, Fabricio Bloisi, our best operator in the Prosus family at iFood, to become the CEO of Prosus. So I've recently moved on, and I'm now just an advisor to the company. But I'd say that the journey to becoming interested in technology and investment and investing is what I just described. It started at Goldman.
Thank you. And we're definitely going to be getting into more of your experiences with the traveling team, making deals across the globe. But before that, if we go back to your upbringing, your parents were born in China. They also lived in Taiwan as well as the United States. Do you think that being a child of immigrants has shaped you in any way as to who you are professionally and how you've made decisions throughout your career?
I'm sure it's shaped me. It's hard for me to say with some specificity exactly the elements which are attributable to my background. I will say as a general matter that we grew up in, my brother and I, my older brother and I, in a very middle-class family, the children of, as you say, immigrants in Iowa City, Iowa, in the middle of the United States. My parents were graduate students at the University of Iowa. They had gone to college, university in Taiwan, and they didn't have a lot to their name other than their education. And we were products of the public school system in Iowa. We knew nothing but to try our best and to work hard. And I think the work ethic is probably attributable, the most attributable, directly attributable to our backgrounds, though I also think some of that's innate. And so I I just say that I have kids now, and they're 14, 11, and I perhaps I can discern some differences in motivation levels. Maybe that's attributable to that background, though I'm not sure. They obviously live a much more comfortable life than I had lived, though we had no complaints growing up as kids. And then one other thing I just say is a matter of values that maybe affects how I engage with people is I I don't take relationships for granted. I interact with everybody, and that's maybe a result of how my father used to, talk to people in the elevator, talk to people, the waiter at the restaurant, and that's a function of his and my mother, of course, emphasizing early that, when you want to achieve, you look up, and you look up to what you want to achieve. When you uh, think about what you have and people and relationships, you look everywhere. You don't care about who it is, what their background is. You engage with people. So maybe that's stayed with me as well from my parents, but that's what I'd say. It's hard for me to pick out a lot of things, but those two things come to mind.
No, I can see how that translates, especially to your work as an investor, where making relationships and getting to know people is key in order to make deals. Now, you've built your career across the United States, Europe, and Asia. How has this international exposure shaped your approach as an investor and as a leader?
Probably obvious thing to say is when you work globally, you have a far deeper appreciation of different market context and the importance that different market context has on business outcomes. Because you have lived in different places, you've worked in different places, you've led deals, and that local market understanding, even if you don't actually understand it, but if you just respect that there is a difference, is crucial. And that's the first name that springs to mind. I would also say that as a matter of personal motivation, I think having a global experience, for me at least, and maybe others will speak differently, it's simply more interesting. It's just as a matter of intellectual stimulation. I think considering macro dynamics, geopolitical factors, regulatory context that is not simply that of the United States, I think that keeps you. I alluded to earlier, half as a joke, that I'm on a journey to continue to develop and learn, and part of that experience for me is having a global perspective and continuing to live a global career. That teaches every day.
I think it's so important to always stay curious, to stay open, and keep learning. As you said, it's a key way in order to grow, not only personally, but professionally as well. And speaking of your professional experience, we'd love to talk to you about leading Prosus, Naspers, and SoftBank. Kyung, I know you also worked at Prosus.
Yeah, so Irvin, let's talk a little bit about Naspers and Prosus, a company that we both know very well. Unfortunately, we never had the privilege to work with each other, but that's another story. At Prosus, you manage one of the world's most international organizations, right? We'll talk about SoftBank as well. But as for Prosus, what were kind of the toughest, let's say, cultural and organizational challenges when steering such a diverse business, right? Investing across Africa, Asia, LATAM. as well as in the US and Europe.
Implicit within your question is the answer, Kyung. The diversity of the portfolio already is a challenge because you, as I alluded to earlier in my comments about having a global career, you need to understand local market context. You need to have people globally, and people globally are different. A person situated in South Africa versus someone in the Middle East versus someone continental Europe, someone in the US, etc. They're different, and they've grown up in different systems, so they think and behave differently. And so managing a cohesive team in the context of diverse global portfolio is one of the challenges. The other challenge I'd say is a function of diversity, or a result of diversity, is simply the balance to strike between being an active and engaged investor, which is what we hope to be, and also simply a supportive founder-friendly firm, right? Which is what we also want to be, because we understand that sometimes the best companies don't want to be controlled. Some of the best companies don't want to have an active minority voice, though we want to be that. So striking the right balance between those two postures, I think, is also a challenge.
Slightly adjacent to some of the questions that we just touched upon, right? But when talking about meeting founders, right, from vast cultural backgrounds, how do you build conviction in these folks as an investor?
There's no one answer to your question, because I think ultimately building conviction, there's a common set of topics, of course, that we all care about: the size of the market, the product market fit, the strength of the team. Are they a flexible team? Can they adjust to various conditions? The quality of the team underneath the top management, the innovation capacity of the company to keep changing because things always change, the financial discipline of the business. Do they understand the balance between growth and profit, and when to push on one versus the other? Are they absolute voracious, like, readers and consumers of the competitive landscape, so they're keeping tabs on what others are doing, and we can have confidence that they will, again, adjust. Adjustment's a big theme for me, as you can hear, to what competitors are doing. That's a common set of things I think any investor would want to do, to understand. In terms of building conviction, the thing we all do, and I hope there's nothing terribly differentiated here, because it should be what everyone does, is to build conviction. You have to speak with everyone in the local market you can, who knows that person, references that you didn't ask for, people that, or they didn't provide. You have to check 72 other angles to ensure that your mosaic of this founding team, or the founder plus the company, is as close to accurate as possible. You can never be 100% sure. Investing involves a deep element of uncertainty and risk mitigation as well. But you try your damn best to get to a mosaic that's as complete as possible.
And I guess, but keen to have your take on it. Part of it is also about, hiring, to a certain degree, locals, right? To invest locally, and empower them.
Yeah, that's consistent. 100% agree, because that local team will have the best chance, again, no assurance, but the best chance of understanding the local specifics, the dynamics, the competitive context. He or she may be, friends because the parents, they're friends to some parent community, then to their kids, and then the parents happen to be involved in the industry some way, or you pick up information from everywhere, and you need locals to accomplish that, to have that antenna on the ground.
At the risk of putting you a little bit on the spot here, but can you share a story, however anecdotal as it may be, where cultural nuance made or broke an international deal? All right, give us some juice if possible.
I have some stories. I would say that I have to be a little bit careful, but I'd say one of the first global stories that comes to mind for me is the experience of negotiating the Vision Fund documents in 2016, 2017. We started in about September 2016, and we concluded May 20th, 2017. Big announcement that SoftBank had created this $93 billion fund. And the principal investors, the LPs in the fund, were from the Middle East, the PIF, which has become incredibly well known now. And also the Mubadala was the second largest investor in the fund. We also had the likes of Apple and Qualcomm and a few others, but and I was responsible for the ones in the U.S. Directly. But the experience of negotiating with the Middle East on such a large project, I'd say, required significant understanding of the Middle Eastern approach to, and I'm probably offending someone, but it's a big region, but there's a particular style of negotiation which is very tough, and so that is what I leave you with. It was not a classic sort of United States style negotiation. It was very tough.
Well, in the end, you managed to pull it off, right? So I think all parties involved can probably laugh at it,
Yeah.
hopefully.
I'll give you another one, just something just sprung into my mind. The experience of investing in China. I led the deal in ByteDance. I looked at other things as well. I originally was actually spending time in Beijing just because I had led the Uber transaction, and then Masa had asked me to spend more time with our friends at Didi. And so I was flying to Beijing every quarter to spend time with Didi, and then I said to my team, "Oh, we should look at some other companies. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff here," and that's how I met Yiming, the founder of ByteDance, and we ended up doing a deal. But I'd say in China, there's you have to understand some elements of course, Chinese culture. I'm Chinese ethnically, and I understand some elements of Chinese culture as a result. But, a big thing is in Chinese culture is face saving. So in Western negotiation, you can call out a counterparty if they say something that's completely wrong because relative to what they said before. You can be very direct and say, "What are you talking about?" And that's not at all what you said. That's not at all what you represented. And you can be kind of aggressive and direct because that's a sort of accepted convention. In China, you can't do that. You have to find other ways of unveiling whether someone has actually represented something properly. And it requires a deep well of creativity. So that's another example in China and then the Middle East. So both very different from the United States and Western Europe style discussion.
That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. Hey, talking still about Prosus here, because it wasn't only about, let's say, investing in portfolio management. If I'm not mistaken, you were also instrumental in sort of major capital allocation moves, if you can phrase it in that fashion. The Tencent buyback, restructuring cross holdings, etc. What lessons? This is really capital markets work, right? What lessons did you learn about creating value in global markets? And obviously, Prosus Naspers is an interesting case there in and of itself.
I think those transactions you just alluded to were, I would consider, more capital markets style transactions, which you're right, related to some of my experience from Goldman. And the scale is just enormous here at Prosus and Naspers when we undertook those transactions. One is still ongoing. The buyback is still ongoing. And I'd say that those are less representative of, I think, global markets and the influence global perspective can have on creating value, rather than simply understanding that how to transfer value from one to another to try to create a larger pie of value for all. So, and that's what we are doing at Prosus still with this buyback, because we're selling something that is worth 100. Our every day we're selling a little bit of Tencent that's conceptually worth 100, and we're buying back our own stock, which is worth 65. So and that 65 owns Tencent. So that math is pretty good. And that style of thinking, I think, is, again, less about the global perspective and more about simply understanding how capital can be and value can be shifted across different parties to create a larger pie for everyone.
Gotcha. Shifting gears to SoftBank, you already alluded to the fact that you led some of SoftBank's most, let's say, iconic investments, the Uber investment, ByteDance. What made these global plays work, or nearly not work?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you say most of some of the iconic investments, but SoftBank's had a long history. Alibaba, the SoftBank mobile deal when Masa bought Vodafone KK in Japan, figuring out to SoftBank Mobile, Yahoo Japan, and now they can exactly it continues. So I don't want to distract from the highlight reel that continues with OpenAI investment and the ARM deal and other things that I have been a part of. I would just say that Masa, when we say SoftBank, of course, it all emanates from Masa. Masa is a big thinker. He takes big risk, and SoftBank institutionally likes to um, double down when the odds are in its favor. And I think that's a simple lesson that all of us as investors or people who are interested in investing must think about all of the time, when not just whether the company attributes are strong, the management team is strong, displays flexibility, all of those elements that I had described earlier, that's almost table stakes. But what about the pricing dynamics? What about the situation? Does the seller or the shareholder, what are the overall leverage dynamics in the situation which enable you as an investor to perhaps obtain a more advantageous position on the cap table than you would otherwise? Well, in the case of Uber, for example, that was a time of incredible turmoil at the company. When Travis was being pushed out, there was a lawsuit Benchmark was levying against the company. The board was a little bit in disarray. And so what a perfect time to come in with significant capital to recapitalize the company, shift out the cap table, redo governance, on and on and on. And so that's when SoftBank invested at a very attractive price. The going wasn't smooth in the beginning, that for sure, because COVID happened, there are a bunch of things that happened. The market actually turned. Instead of growth, the market started to see profits. This is before COVID, then it changed again. But long story short, the business is a good business, and Dara has done an exceptional job of creating what he's created, and he and the team, we have to credit the team as well since then. But I just say that the dynamics of the deal were advantageous, right? And so you and we, all of us, should always look for those kinds of opportunities. And these days, in the last 18 months, 2 years, there's been a lot talked about secondaries, because many funds need to show DPI and are unloading secondaries. Those are the similar style of thinking. Not just invest in good companies, but think about the dynamics. Is the basic seller-buyer relationship, where are the pressure points that might enable you to come in at an advantageous position?
Talking about SoftBank's behavior, which was often criticized, right, and dismissed as capital flooding. What is the biggest, let's say, misconception about that strategy, you would say?
Dara used to call it at Uber the capital cannon. It's better that the cannon is pointed at others than at me. I just thought of that. The misconception, there's not much misconception, right? There was a strategy. It's quite explicit. The Masa is a believer in market share, and particularly in network effects businesses. Now you have to read properly whether the business genuinely has network effects, whether the unit economics of the business at that moment in time are sufficiently attractive to back in a big way, because the model can replicate over time. You have to read that properly. Sometimes SoftBank read it incorrectly. If you read that properly, this strategy is a viable strategy. It's not a strategy that invites friends for dinner, right? This doesn't create you don't You don't invite the competitors over to dinner, you don't get invited later because of this strategy, of course, creates a lot of enemies. But it's a viable strategy. It means you can beat your competition and then seek the spoils of having the network effects work to your advantage. So there's no misconception. I think that the strategy was successful in a few cases, but it also failed spectacularly in others.
Got it. All right, let's move to maybe some advice related questions, Erica.
Yes. So, throughout your career, when you've looked at entrepreneurs trying to scale their business or startup beyond their home country, what are some consistent patterns of success or consistent patterns of failure that you've observed?
I'm trying to figure out the most succinct way of saying what I'm about to say. And it relates to even Kyung's question of when the capital cannon or capital flooding strategy worked. When did it work and when did it not work? It often didn't work when the CEO or the founder team, I'd call it the megalomaniac archetype. The megalomaniac archetype, generally, we've seen where it can work. I'm not going to name names. You understand the business landscape today. There are some successful, extraordinarily successful examples. So it can work. It can also fail spectacularly because that archetype doesn't tend to do what I'm about to describe, which is continue to be a student of business, be a student of your company, be a student of the competition, be a student of technology, be a student of innovation. Continue to learn and absorb and change and adjust, because the megalomaniac doesn't tend to want to do anything but have people say yes to him or her. They don't have the humility to change. Now, again, I'm not saying that the megalomaniac, that strong, very personality-driven, maybe I use a more neutral term, personality-driven, strong founding leader doesn't mean that it cannot be successful. We've seen examples. It can be successful. It burns a lot of people, but it can also drive enormous value creation and innovation. But there's a huge downside. And the SoftBank story, in the SoftBank episode, let's call it the episode, which is the Vision Fund. We're in a new era now, the SoftBank era of Vision Fund. There were a lot of failures because of that.
Well, and I think it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of our conversation of asking questions, staying curious, and always learning, being this lifelong student.
Yeah, always learning and adjusting. And people who I really respected, who I've backed people subsequently, even when their first thing wasn't successful, because I've discovered, or not discovered, but I observed in them this quality, that they are constantly learning, adjusting, acknowledging their errors, acknowledging their deficit in knowledge and experience. And failure is just one part of the overall journey for them. And the quality they displayed in terms of understanding and adjusting and making better decisions the next time, that's super important to the ultimate outcome.
And could you explain to our European entrepreneurs who are listening what is perhaps the key difference between the US capital market versus its European counterpart?
The difference is capital availability. The capital availability in the United States is far beyond what's available in Europe in terms of gross numbers. And the statistics, I've read a lot of statistics, so I'll ask your audience just to find your own statistic, but you know that it's orders of magnitude different in terms of capital availability, which also causes, new company formation to be markedly lower in Europe than in the United States. And not just new company formation, but size of companies. So we all know the big European concerns, the ASMLs and the Adyen's and the SAPs, and but there are Spotify and so forth. But there aren't that many relative to the U.S. and it's because of capital availability. But that is a result of the root causes are different, right? The root causes are multi-market picture. I used the word mosaic earlier. It's a composite or mosaic. Not every country is the same, of course. Very different histories, cultures, people, business practices, taxation schemes for things like stock options, regulatory context around competition policy, is different from the US. So there are other root causes, but then the intermediate driver of the capital markets difference is not as much funding, and therefore not as much scale up, and not as fewer, large private companies that emerge. There have been more recent Klarna and Revolut and so forth, but their Mistral, just huge deal, just announced, right, with ASML overnight. But by and large, that's the difference. I think it's changing. I think it's changing, but change is slow. It starts with general appetite for backing local champions. And I think in the world we're living in today, which everyone is talking about as a deglobalized world, notwithstanding the theme of this podcast and my comments earlier about how interesting it is to have a global perspective, the world is deglobal. Right? We are becoming regional blocks. I think that's an obvious thing to say. And with that comes more interest in funding local champions by local investors. I think ASML, even yesterday in the press, the public discourse, they've been very careful not just to say it's not just that, right? We didn't back them just because Mistral is a European champion. There real genuine commercial benefit for ASML in deploying AI across their business. But it has to be the case that as we become more regional in orientation, that there will be more regional investment as well.
For sure. Whereby the interesting detail is, by the way, Mistral is a French company, and the recently appointed CEO of ASML is also a French individual. But leave that aside. We have a bunch of investors listening as well as part of our audience, right? You're originally an American investor yourself, Ervin. What if you look at the investment approach, right, of investment professionals in the U.S. or stemming from the U.S. versus those that are European that you work with? Do you see any differences? What can we learn? I consider myself to be European. What can we learn from the American investment approach, if any?
I think of the topic differently, Kyung. I think of the investment discipline as a discipline is actually pretty common, and it involves a common set of decision processes, discussion techniques, diligence approach, attributes that we all investigate, which I alluded to earlier. I described some of those earlier. And so I don't think the Americans do anything differently in a big way, maybe on the margin based on firm-specific differences as opposed to market-specific differences relative to the Europeans. So I don't think that that's a big driver of difference. I think what's more a driver of difference is what we talked about earlier, sort of the extent of opportunity, the monolithic, homogenous market of the U.S. and China, which we should never forget China, because China happens to be a big player, continues to be incredible innovator, and will also be a leader in AI alongside the U.S. So I think that's more important than the investment discipline having differences of approach.
I think that's fair. Talking about sort of the balance shift globally, right, and the future of venture and growth investing. How do you see that balance shift evolve, right? What are the big white spaces? I know it's a fairly open-ended question.
In terms of geography, Kyung, or in terms of sector?
Why don't we tackle both?
Yeah, the balance shifting, I actually don't see the balance shifting much. I think the U.S. will continue to drive a lot of the innovation in this AI world based on the capital market differences we've talked about, based on the large homogenous market, based on the incredible focus and drive that the government also has on ensuring that the U.S. is still a leader here. So I don't think that's going to change. China, we understand, is also, you heard my remarks earlier, and it's a race between the U.S. and China is very scrappy, extremely hardworking, very smart, and underestimate them at your peril. They are going to be absolutely prominent and leader in the global innovation market. And in Europe, I think there will be more progress, I anticipate, relative to what we've seen in years past in terms of interests and new company formation, regulatory relaxation. I think we should anticipate it will happen. I'm not going to predict when, but I think that there's a lot of energy towards regulatory relaxation or reevaluation. Maybe that's the better word. And then India continues to be, a shooting star. So I think those areas the dynamics that we've seen will continue for some time. I don't anticipate significant shifts. And I would say in terms of industry, everything's going to be oriented around AI firstly, and we can talk about that for a long time if you'd like, but I'm going to pause and just say that. And that's not just the direct innovators themselves that are creating technologies related to AI, whether that's models or apps or middleware or the chips layer or hyperscalers and so forth. But I think the businesses themselves, which deploy AI and improve themselves, I'm a big believer that, for instance, the services sector, which necessarily by definition uses a lot of labor, and there's a huge productivity and growth potential unlock as a result of deploying AI smartly in services industries. I'm talking, IT services, tax accounting firms, but also hospitality, food service. There's a bunch of services related stuff, which right now, heretofore, is extremely labor intensive. Watch that space. I think more people will start looking to see how the deployment of AI can enhance those businesses to great return for investors.
Totally. I think we're, at the brink of disruption in business services for sure. Let's shift gears. Erica, should we touch upon Passport?
Yes, so one thing that we'll be doing throughout this series is ending our conversations by asking you, our guest, a couple of fun, rapid fire questions. And our first one for you, Ervin, is regarding your nonprofit organization, which you co founded. It's called Passport. It supports a cause that is so important. It's dear to me as well. So I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about Passport and if there's any way that we can get involved or support the organization.
I love talking about Passport, and I would just say the mission of the nonprofit is to support first generation and low income students in university in the US. There's a lot of research that's come out recently, including by Nobel laureates, that the place you go to university as an American college student is not important for determining life outcomes other than for first generation low income students. Meaning you could go to a second or third tier school, but you grew up in a good family. Your life outcome is still going to be okay, right? But if you conversely, if you give a first generation low income student the opportunity to attend an Ivy plus school, for example, okay, that has a generational effect on the livelihoods of that person, their family, and so forth. You guys understand? So I wanted to help. I like to think of highly leveraged ways of helping people. I was giving money to Dartmouth, my alma mater, and I started supporting their effort to support first generation local students. And then I thought, well, I want to do more than this. I want to do more than just help my Dartmouth alma mater. So I created this nonprofit to support this population of students. And my goal is to transform, not only help these students, but also transform the way we think about these students, because sometimes support of a nonprofit orientation is considered charity, and charity comes with a bunch of connotations, like these people need help. No. You don't understand. First generation low income students who've gotten into these schools have overcome incredible odds. They have the most grit. They have the most fight than any other student. Yeah. They deserve our help. It's not that they need our help. They deserve our help because you're actually supporting the best of the best. It's like what I'm trying to create, Erica and Kyung. I want to create the feeling that when people think about YPO, for instance, Young Presidents Organization, right? It's supporting CEOs and founders globally with local chapters. You're the best of the best. You're part of YPO. I want to create that feeling for first-generation low-income students in the United States. We're the best of the best. I wasn't one. I say we, but I wasn't one. But I was a middle-class person who my trajectories changed dramatically because I went to Dartmouth. Absolutely. I would not be here with you on a podcast had I not chosen to go to Dartmouth. I was lucky enough to get in, and I want to support this population because I think it's a highly leveraged way of changing people's lives and generational and all that good stuff. So that's what Passport's about.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. And I couldn't have said it better about how important it is to provide this type of support in order to uplift the next generation.
Yeah. So I've enlisted my friends. We have content. We're figuring out ways of providing more financial support, content, mentorship, and so forth. So I've enlisted some friends who, do talks that were exclusive to that community. Dara from Uber, Tony from DoorDash. These are the kinds of people. It's still a work in progress. We haven't attained nearly what I wanted to attain yet, but you can tell from the way I talk about it, I'm very passionate about it, and I want to keep going and deliver impact here.
For those that want to learn more, what's the website?
GoPassport.org.
GoPassport.org. Thank you. Kyung, what's your question for Ervin?
I wanted to allude to the fact that it's interesting because we at Daphne do something similar, right, with our New Time 4 fund, which we can, talk about a bit more with you, Ervin, offline. In terms of questions, more kind of on the personal note, Ervin, beyond deals and capital, what motivates you most at this stage of your career?
What motivates me most is learning, absorbing, digesting, continuing to develop, actually professionally, not just personally. I think that's a gift all of us have as people. We can continue to change, and I can continue to improve my serve and backhand, Kyung. You know about that, as we play tennis together. But I can also improve other things. That's a gift that we all have as people. So that motivates me a lot. And then secondly, the opportunity to drive better performance outcomes in enterprises by managing people better. People are the inputs. Now we have some AI to add on top, but people are the inputs to performance, and so much of outcomes. Styles can differ for the situation, and facts and circumstances matter in terms of determining which style is most appropriate. But I think when you see an organization that just hums, we've all seen them in our careers, and the results hum, but it's because the people have just such passion and energy for coming to work. They want to, they come together and they have lunch and they talk shop and they're friends, and they're not motivated by, of course, everyone wants to create wealth for themselves and their families. Yes, that's an element, but the companies that hum, you can see it. It's not just money. I'm creating something. I'm changing the world. I'm delivering a better product. That energy and that's such a rewarding thing to see and to try to manage better.
Nice. And on a sort of more relaxed note, there's two guys at the moment leading the world of tennis, Yannick Sinner and Alcaraz. Only 10 years ago, we were talking about the big four. If there would be two other guys that you would put up there, who would those be?
If they're two up-and-comers?
Exactly.
Wow. What a question, Kyung. The two titans of the sport at the moment, Sinner and Alcaraz, they outpace the others, outclass the others by such a significant margin. The question's hard to consider. There is this French guy, who I think has a real shot at being top
Yes.
10, Giovanni Impesci Pericard, who has a beautiful serve. And I'm not just pandering to the crowd because I'm saying he's a French guy. I think he's got incredible talent. He's he's physically gifted. He's I think he has real top 10 potential. And so I just say that one comes to mind, even though his results haven't been super this year. I can't even think of a second one, but I like watching Mpeshi Pericard play.
No, I would agree on that one. I would put Jakub Mensik up there as well.
Oh, of course. That's another one. He's another one for sure. He won Miami, so he's already had a good result.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He's on his way.
Well, Ervin, thank you so much for joining us on Venturing Abroad. This conversation, I've learned so much. I have a lot of key takeaways that I'm going to be able to keep with me and keep in mind. So thank you for your time. And thank you to Kyung as well for co-hosting this episode. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
You're welcome, guys. Nice to spend time with you.
Likewise.
And thank you to you, the listener, for spending a little bit of your time with us today. We'll see you next week as we continue venturing abroad.